For those looking for a liberatory martial arts learning approach and curriculum, we've created Liberation Martial Arts. It doesn't just teach you martial arts, it's also an approach to learning movement skills. The whole point of our program is to remove the need for a coach, to liberate you from the need of top-down instruction and toxic gyms. If you have a coach and also have a gym, then you can apply our learning approach to improve your progress. Or maybe you also need a supplemental martial arts community as a counter to the commercial gym you go to. You can actually apply our learning approach to learn anything, and our practitioners are. They're applying it to all sorts of things, whether physical, mental, or even personal. It's just a radically different approach to everything. Sign up for Liberation Martial Arts at the Southpaw Pod Patreon, or support us by signing up for one of the other tiers and help us support this project while also getting access to bonus content like early releases of SDS9 with transcripts. SDS9 Season 3 was recorded from the beginning of 2023 to early 2024 and was first published on Patreon. Now that we're done with the season, the entire season is being released all at once on the Southpaw public feed. Find Season 4 on the Southpaw Pod Patreon. This is Southpaw Deep Space Nine Season 3, where we analyze Deep Space Nine and Star Trek from a political and historical lens episode by episode. I'm watching DS9 with fresh eyes, and Scott is our veteran Trek fan. We are discussing Season 3 of DS9, Episode 16, Profit Motive, which I should explain is a play on words between profit with an F, making money, and profit with a PH, which is like the last episode, the person who makes prophecies.
It's like a double entendre, Sam.
You know we love those on this show. Scott, tell us about this episode.
We open in. Quark is receiving an ear massage, and as you know that for the Ferengis, the ear is a incredibly erogenous zone, so ear massages are very pleasant for them. And conversely, like when someone pulls on their ear or screams in their ear or stabs their ear, it is incredibly painful. He's getting it from a young person named Emmy, not like too young, but just like younger, talking about his wares. They're making a trade for stem bolts for her family. When the Grand Negus Zek, the leader of the Ferengi people, arrives with his servant Maihardu to live at Quark's. We see that Ben asks Bashir up to go see some people, but it is a secret party. He has been nominated for a Carrington Award for his biomedical work. It is the most prestigious Federation award for medicine. He is the youngest nominee of all time. It turns out that Dax secretly put his name in because, Dax has lived for like 7 generations, so everybody knows everybody. Bashir is visibly affected and leaves the room. Bashir doesn't want to make a big deal about it. Also, Carrington wards are usually for lifetime doctors, usually much, much older. Most of the other people are 100 years old or more. Bashir feels he won't win. Dax is actually surprised by his seeming modesty. Back to Rom's quarters, the space is a mess. Quark is staying there with him while Zek is at Quark's house. Quark notices that a bunch of his stuff is in Rom's place. Rom has been stealing from him, which Quark is both like impressed and disgusted by. Quark insists Rom cleans the house, and Rom refuses, says, "This is my house, my rules. If you want it clean, clean it." So Rom and Quark goes to see Zek, and Zek is just very uncharacteristic of how we know him to be. Instead of angry and duplicitous and annoyed. He's happy to see them. He has gotten rid of Quark's furniture. He has written a book. He is in great spirits. He's rewritten the rules of acquisition for modern Ferengi. And as they're looking at the new rules, they are antithetical to usual Ferengi beliefs. It's all about placing relationships over money, charity, doing good deeds, being kind. Quark and Rom cannot wrap their heads around it. Quark believes it is a test, a code. Quark believes it must be a bigger picture thing, but so far the math is not mathing. At Quark's, Zek buys everyone a drink. Zek says making others happy is his thing. It's what he loves. He doesn't even like to sniff beetle sniff anymore because it hurts beetles. That's the sort of one of the things he enjoys. Zek also reveals that he messed up Quark's sale with Emmy, saying that he saw that Quark was really overcharging her for the stem bolts. So he told her where she could get stem bolts wholesale. What is going on? Miles and Bashir are playing darts. Miles is talking about Carrington Awards. Miles points out that Bashir doesn't stand a chance and that no one is talking about Bashir, and that is sort of messing up Bashir's game. So Bashir gets annoyed and he makes a note about Keiko being gone for a long time, and that makes Miles mess up at the darts. Okay. Meanwhile, Rom is now helping Zek build the Ferengi Benevolent Association. Zek wants Ferengis to move beyond greed. Greed is dead. Rom is going to support Zek as they change the Ferengi way. Quark and Rom will be side by side and part of the society, and they're going to go with him to Ferenginar to tell all the new ways. Quark believes that this is going to get them killed. So Quark has Zek looked at by Bashir. There is no medical malady. He is fine. Quark makes a diss at Bashir not being even good to win a Carrington. Zek even tries to tip Bashir. This is just a very different Zek that we are used to. The next day, we find out that Zek is going to give a gift to the Bajoran people. Mahardu shows to Ram and Nog that Zek has one of the missing Bajoran orbs. Quark believes that it is the orbs that have changed Zek's behavior. Quark opens the orb and is taken into a new dimension where a version of Zek is there, and he is taunting Quark, says mysteries sometimes answer themselves, and inside the orb is a vision. He is just confused. But Quark believes that the prophets, which are the aliens inside the wormhole, which they created the new rules. So what Quark is able to find is that the logs show Zek got from the orbs from Cardassia, went to the wormhole, and then came to Deep Space Nine. Odo goes to see Bashir, that he heard from someone who heard from someone that heard from someone who knew somebody who dated somebody, that the big prospect for the Carrington Award, Dr. Wade, would not be winning the award. So, and then he realizes that Bashir had actually written an acceptance speech. Not as humble as you think. Quark and the squad kidnap Zek. But Zek is humming and jovial and being like, I forgive you, this is fine. Quark is going to take Zek to the wormhole to try to figure it out. Zek says the wormhole aliens are delightful. So when inside the wormhole, Quark opens the orb and talks to the prophets, which represent themselves as many of the people on Deep Space Nine. And they ask if the Cisco sent him. They said Zek came to learn of the future outside of linear time and explained game and profit. They found profit dangerous and disadvantageous, threatening and unnecessary. They found that Ferengi used to actually be subtle and kinder and restored Zek to an earlier form of Ferengi. They find Quark and his friends to be adversarial. The prophets offer to switch Quark back. Quark has a monologue that greed is good and that without greed, the world would suck. People would not be fed. People would be unclothed. Quark points out that if they change him back to a different person, more and more Ferengis are going to come and see the prophets and annoy them. And the prophets are kind of annoyed by this. So they do their prophet thing and Quark and Zek wake up. Zek is back to his normal self and is like, give the orb to the Bajorans. I'm going to sell the orb to the Bajorans. So he's back to just being who we know him to be. Then we go see that the Carrington Awards are given to Henri Roger. He wins the Carrington. Bashir admits that he is hurt, and what are you going to do? But he has a long time to work on his stuff. Zek has every copy of the new rules of acquisition destroyed, and Quark is upset that he actually lost money during the situation and gained nothing. But it turns out that during the whole situation, Rom embezzled some of Zek's money from the benevolence situation. Yay, theft.
A note to our listeners. If you love the Southpaw Project, please support us and help us get paid for our labor by financially supporting us on Patreon. This will give you access to exclusive bonus content, like early releases of Southpaw Deep Space 9, our fictional narrative podcast, Fighters Brew, break-free versions of our shows without interruptions like you're hearing now, bonus articles, Fighters Brew transcripts with extra content, Liberation Martial Arts Online, as well as our private chat group on Discord. You can also make one-time donations at Ko-Fi or show your solidarity by wearing our swag. You can find all pertinent links at southpawpod.com. Scott, first off, do you like the revised rules of acquisition?
I love the revised rules of acquisition. Of course I do.
Then the Enlightened, right, when Quark meets them, is basically saying capitalism is evil. We also see how Ferengi used to be. So it's basically saying capitalism changes people and the culture for worse. It turns everything into Hunger Games eventually. It's only a matter of time. But since this is a comedy episode, no one's going to take the message seriously. But because it is comedy, I think they were able to say a lot more criticisms about capitalism.
Right. And I loved this episode for that. You know, you'll ask me my rating later, but this episode was really fun because they weren't afraid to say some things that really resonate with me, that our purpose is kindness. Our purpose is to help others. Greed is dead, you know, and that even the prophets were like, when we look at linearity, this is adversarial and this is bad. This your way of life is bad. To me, wasn't saying the whole race is bad because, you know, this whole stuff is complex, but just saying that a life that exists on winning, losing, fortune, greed is bad. So yeah, I loved it.
Yeah. It seemed like they were using comedy to hide a lot of their most subversive messages, because we've talked about how in previous DS9 episodes, they were getting hate mail about even approaching things from a centrist lens, like when they were in San Francisco in 2024 and just approaching it more from a centrist view. A lot of fans were still mad even about that it was too, I don't know what the word they used back then, but it was too liberal, they said. Now, this episode seems tangentially related to the last episode about scripture and different interpretations. And there's always modern revised versions of Bibles and such, and this seems to be playing to that. Prophet and prophet, the two similar sounding words, seems to indicate that capitalism itself is a religion, which is something we explored a little bit in the last episode as well, and how capitalism is his own religious bias.
Mm-hmm.
And in this episode, Zek goes from conservative capitalist Jesus to socialist Jesus, which we later find out is how Ferengi used to be until somebody put it in their heads about the profit motive.
Right.
And that changed everything. It's like how whenever capitalism comes to a country, it destroys that country. So this episode with socialist Jesus Zek, this is the luxury space communism we've been waiting for, because if they chose to, Money doesn't have to exist because now they have replicators. In your first watch, Scott, or this time through, did you like that flipping of the script to see a socialist Grand Nagus? Like when you first saw it, did you just see this as a throwaway middle episode? And do you see things differently now watching it with your current eyes?
So yeah, this is an episode that I skipped in my previous rewatch, but I didn't skip it in my rewatch before my previous rewatch. So this is the third time I've watched this episode, and I always thought it was a funny episode, but I wasn't. My politics weren't nearly as like capitalism evil as they are now.
Mm-hmm.
So I just thought it was a funny episode. Where this episode, this version, this time I'm like, oh, he's spitting.
Yeah.
He's saying, like, I'm like, oh, I like this guy.
There's some biting critiques about capitalism here where it's not all just expository. It's also just in the way it's written. Now, when we get to the wormhole with Quark and Zek, we find out Zek has reached a state of enlightenment, much like Buddha, right? Who was once rich as fuck and also royalty, then thought better of it. But of course, since this is episodic, we have to return things back to normal. Like Bashir didn't win any award either. So Scott, then what was the point of this episode? Because we just went back to the way it was.
There was no point of this episode. This episode is a filler episode. We learn nothing about anybody.
We could think of it as fan service, right? Some candy for the socialists.
Yes, it's fan service for socialists. We get to see the prophets a little bit, which is fun. We get to see that prophets are canonically anti-capitalism. So for that, I give this episode a 4 out of 5. But from a mythology standpoint, the episode is almost completely useless.
But it also maybe inadvertently agrees with a lot of what modern anthropologists and socialist anthropologists have been saying, which is that no, capitalism is not a fixture of the universe. It's not something that's always existed. It is not human nature. So a lot of what we consider is quote unquote human nature is learned and also a byproduct of the material conditions.
Yeah.
But did this episode prove to you that DS9 can do comedy? Because DS9 up until this point has had comedic scenes, comedic episodes, whereas this episode seems just straight up a comedy.
Oh, well, to me, I think that Deep Space Nine has always had a good comedy bone. But then again, I realized that I'm not watching it with new eyes, so you haven't seen it. But, oh yeah, Deep Space Nine has jokes.
Everybody says after season 3, after DS9 gets the beard, it gets better. Is part of getting better meaning also they get funnier?
Yes, there are laugh out loud episodes, though many of them involve Ferengi.
Which is a good segue to my last point, because you told me Ferengi were first introduced to be a prominent baddie, but now it seems their role is more as comic relief, which I like. But I do disagree that they represent modern capitalists because Ferengi are more like cartoons. They're incompetent capitalists, which is why they're funny. But capitalists in real life, they're not funny. Like the Grand Nagus in real life would be scary as fuck and probably would be the mastermind of countless genocides and overthrows throughout Latin America. Or he'd run for office and be Nixon or Reagan. I mean, Scott, do powerful capitalists in real life scare you?
Yes.
Especially with all the tech capitalists. I know you have some thoughts about this. Give me your thoughts about the tech acceleration of capitalism.
Well, the tech acceleration is what is going to kill us all. And it's really...
Maybe I shouldn't have asked you.
It's really very scary. It's about the tech acceleration of AI is about to create some problems in the music world that no one is prepared for.
Can you explain that?
Sure. So last week, if you're listening, this is We're recording in April of 2023. So in April of 2023, a song was released featuring Drake and someone else saying some really controversial stuff. And then it was found out that it was completely created by artificial intelligence.
Did people think it was really them?
People thought it was really them. People were making think pieces about it. People were trying to get it taken off the radio. People were like, because not only was it them, they thought it was them. They were saying some like controversial stuff. And it took like a lot of people to realize that it wasn't.
So even experts couldn't tell, not just because the sound of their voice sounded real, but the production must have sounded good enough where they're like, no, this is not just like a satire song. This is like a high production song.
Yeah. And you can do it all now with artificial intelligence because artificial intelligence is going so fast.
Scott, do you remember like maybe 5 years ago or 6 years ago where we first heard like the first attempts at AI written songs and music? Like there was like a couple of songs written in the style of like the Beatles or the Beach Boys. And it was like cute, right? We weren't scared yet, right? Do you remember this?
Mm-hmm.
We weren't scared because it was just like, oh, it sounds like, you know, something like a 5-year-old would write, but it was interesting enough for you to find it amusing, right? So fast forward, we went from that where it sounded obviously made by AI, wasn't very good, but at best it was amusing, to where it's enough to trick insiders.
Yeah.
Remember our first conversations about AI, like just 4 months ago, where we were just talking about, have you seen these things where they're generating art? And, oh, did you see this thing? Like, and then a month after that, we were like, hey, did you see this thing? You could chat with it online.
Right. So I'm just saying it's happening very fast. It's happening fast to the point where we're like, some of these Star Trek shows are becoming a little anachronistic because they're not taking into consideration how AI would fit into these things. But whatever. I'd like to change the subject, to be honest.
So the main takeaway is capitalism is very scary.
Yeah.
Scott, can you tell us about the next episode?
Next episode is called Visionary, and Miles is seeing some things.
Okay. Until then. If you like this episode and like what we do, support us on Patreon. We also have the Liberation Martial Arts program if you want to train with us from wherever you are. It's both theory and practice and removes the need for an instructor. What you're learning is how to teach yourself. It's also an approach you can take with you from the gym into the world. Sponsors get a monthly training session with me, either in person or online. Supporting me not only helps me pay my bills, but it also helps me support my family. Find all our links, including Southpaw merch, at southpawpod.com.